Hi, I'm Angie with Core Star Pilates, and this is Mac the Cat. And I'm going to talk to you today about definitions of maybe some terms that you've heard in some of our classes, so you have a better idea of exactly what we're talking about. So today is going to be about the breath, about the powerhouse or your core, about neutral versus imprint, and about stacking blocks. So if you're just looking for one or two of those, you feel free to fast forward if you like. Otherwise, you can certainly watch the whole thing. So let's get into it. So the breath. Everybody needs to breathe. Even cats need to breathe. So in Pilates, we need you to breathe. Ideally, you're breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth. Now, if you can't breathe through your nose for whatever reason, you got a head cold, allergies, what have you, I've got a cat that I'm allergic to, you can absolutely breathe in and out through the mouth. If you're from the yoga world or you naturally breathe in and out through your nose rather than your mouth, you can do that as well. The main thing I want you to take away from this is that I don't want you to hold your breath. So as long as you're breathing, you're doing okay. Now in Pilates, we do give cues paired with the breath. So we'll say inhale and do this, exhale and do that. If you're doing opposite breath, don't worry about it. Learn the move first and then the breath will come naturally. So when we say breathe, we do want you to take as deep of a breath as you can, especially if we're doing an exercise that's a little bit more slower paced. If you're doing exercises faster paced, like a single leg stretch where you're moving a little bit faster, then you're not necessarily going to breathe as deeply. The deeper breath is going to help bring you into your body, give you a little bit more body awareness, and hopefully get your mind into what's going on in your Pilates class and less about what's going on out in the rest of the world. So let's practice a little breathing to start with. So let's go inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth, maybe through pursed lips, maybe not. Maybe bring your hands here to the lower parts of your ribs and do that here. So breathe into your hands, exhale, breathe out. So like that. Let's try that again. Inhale through the nose maybe, exhale through the mouth. So that's breathing. I know you know how to breathe. That's Pilates breathing. So like I said, absolutely try not to hold your breath. If you're holding your breath, maybe check in with your body about something going on. Maybe an exercise needs to be modified. Maybe you just need to take a break. I know sometimes I tend to hold my breath when I'm learning something new. So get the patterns down and then the breath will naturally come eventually. So do your best and breathe. Powerhouse or your core. What are we talking about? Well, we're talking about generally this area. So if you think about a cylinder in your torso, and the base of the cylinder is your pelvic floor, the top of your cylinder is your diaphragm, and then the sides are your inner abdominal walls. That's about the general area of what we're talking about. And we're going to use that area to help stabilize your torso against the movement of whatever exercise you're doing. Legs, arms, head, shoulders, whatever exercise it is, this is where you want to move from, or at least stabilize from. So to find this, think of using your breath as the pilot light to help ignite your powerhouse or your core. So let's find that. So come on down to your mat, onto your back. You can use hamstrings to hold on to come down, and just settle in. Knees are bent, feet on the mat. Arms, it doesn't matter because I want you to bring your hands to your belly. So somewhere around in here, and just kind of maybe a little bit of pressure, not a lot. And I want you to take an inhale. Exhale, blow that breath out as hard as you can. And when you did that, maybe you feel a little engagement in that abdominal area. So let's try that again. Nice big inhale. Exhale, blow all that breath out. And hopefully you feel that kind of, not necessarily rigidity, but definitely a little bit of firmness coming underneath your fingertips here, underneath your hands. So try that again. Inhale. Exhale. Blow out. Now see if you can keep that engagement through an inhale. Find it again for your exhale if you need to. See if you can hold it through an inhale. One more time with your exhale. And then go ahead and release that. So that area there, that is where we're talking about when we're talking about powerhouse and core. Using your exhale is absolutely going to help you make that connection to your core. So my personal favorite thing to say is that when you're doing an exercise, If you have a part that's really hard for you to try and get through, like if it's a roll up and you have that certain part where you just can't get past it, put your exhale there. That's going to help reconnect you to your core. It might help you get through that movement. So put the exhale on the hardest part of whatever exercise you're doing and let that help connect to your core. Neutral and imprint or pelvic tilt. We teach a contemporary style of Pilates, and we use that neutral or an imprint or pelvic tilt in doing our exercises. So neutral is where we would ideally like to be, but sometimes when your legs are up in the air or you're doing a more challenging exercise for your abs, then sometimes that imprint or that pelvic tilt is a nice place to be to help strengthen that connection to your powerhouse. So before we go into it, let me add a little caveat here. Depending on what shape your spine says. So like ideally is that S-shaped curve. Some of us don't have an S-shaped curve. Maybe you got a little bit more flat spot in your lumbar spine. Maybe you have more of a curve in your lumbar spine. So depending on how that feels, it may or may not work for you. So take all of this and see what works for you. All right, so let's come on down to the mat and get a feel for it. So grab hold of hamstrings, roll yourself down, and settle in. So before we go anywhere, let's think about how this feels in our body. So the pelvis should be fairly heavy on the mat, your ribs should be fairly heavy on the mat, and there should be a little bit of space. It might be only metaphorical, but there should be a little bit of space in the lumbar spine instead of it feeling heavy on the mat. So that is probably going to be pretty close to your neutral, but let's find out. So take your hands and bring them to the front of your pelvis, and then use whatever muscles you want and just rock your pelvis forward and back. Forward and back. So coming this way, if you were to think like if your pelvis was a bowl, and I know like we're kind of on the end, on the floor here, but if I was spilling a lot more water out of the back here, then this is going to be tilted back, right? My pivot bone's higher than my hip bones, my SIS. And if I go all the way this way forward, water would be spilling out the front if I was seated, right? So this would be forward, and my ASIS, my hip bones, are above my pubic bone. So find a point where you feel about midway between those two extremes, and that's going to be your neutral. So again, pelvis should be heavy, ribs should be heavy, there should be a little bit of space in that lumbar spine. So that's probably going to be your ideal neutral. Your hip bones might be in the same plane as the pubic bone, and that should be parallel to the floor. But again, depending on how your lumbar spine is curved, you may or may not have a lot of space there, and there might be a slight variation here, and that's okay. All right, so now that we found our neutral, let's find imprint. So imprint, think about thumbs to the base of your ribs, fingertips towards your hips, and we want to reduce that space by using the muscles that run through there. So let's take an inhale. Now exhale, use those abs and see if you can tilt your pelvis, reducing that space. Now this is really small, like it might be only a 1/4 inch this is shortening. This is not, we're not going for, 2 inches or something ridiculous. I want you to use your abs and think about just reducing that space a little bit. And then inhale, kind of release it. And let's do that again. Exhale, tilt the pelvis, but use your abs to help pull the hips towards the ribs. And then inhale, release. Let's try that again. Exhale, tilt, and then hold it and see about bringing your legs into tabletop, and see if that feels a little bit easier doing that from this position where you have a deeper connection to your powerhouse than if you were in neutral and were to bring your legs into tabletop. That might feel a little bit stronger being in imprint and in tabletop than being in neutral and in tabletop. But if you feel stronger in neutral and tabletop, then please do that. Again, it depends on that lumbar spine curve. So if you have a larger curve in your lumbar spine, just getting to a true neutral is going to be a challenge for you, and getting into imprint, I'm not going to say impossible, but it's going to feel like really a lot of work to get into an imprint. So maybe your goal is to get to neutral, and that's enough. The main thing with that is just, where do you feel strong in your body? Where do you feel that strongest connection to your core to be able to stabilize while legs are doing things in the air, or you're doing something with a ball behind the back? Where can you find that strong connection to your core that will help stabilize against whatever movement you're doing? So that's neutral versus imprint or pelvic tilt. Now we're going to talk about the rest of the body, specifically the torso alignment. What we're going to think about is, if each segment of your body was a building block and I wanted you to stack those blocks so you have a nice straight tower. That's what we're going to think about here. So it's more about, like, when we're doing some kind of movement, that we're keeping our body in a decent alignment here, and we're not too janky or too loose with our movement. Now, obviously, if you've got things going on, if you've got some curvatures, if you've got some rotations going on, your blocks might be a little bit not in a straight tower, and truthfully, most of us is going to be a little bit out of a straight tower, and that's okay. But it's the idea of having your ribs over your pelvis, your shoulders over your ribs, your head over your shoulders, and keeping that kind of form through flexion, through extension, through a rotation, and through a lateral or side bend, so that everything is kind of moving in one piece and it's stacked. So let's come on down to the mat, because I want you to kind of have a good feeling for where those parts are in your body, and this is a great way to find them. So down on the mat, feel how your pelvis is heavy on the mat, and then you've got a space in the lumbar spine, and then the ribs are heavy on the mat. Your shoulders are heavy on the mat, but you have a space at your neck, and then your head is heavy on your mat. So those are the points we want to think about when we're talking about keeping things stacked, keeping the entire spine in neutral. If you feel like you're in a good position here, then see about coming back up to seated, and can you bring everything, let me turn this way, into a good neutral alignment here. Now, you might need to sit up on something if hip flexors are tight and your pelvis wants to go this way when you're seated. Please do. But think about, pelvis is in neutral, so if your pelvis was a bowl, you wouldn't be spilling water out of the back or out of the front. It'd be nice and level. Your ribs are over your hips, your shoulders over your ribs, and your head is over your shoulders. Now, some of us might be a little bit more here, especially if you've been working on a computer all day long, right? So do what you can to get everything into a mostly neutral alignment, like so. And that is stacking your blocks. I hope I've given you some clarity on some of the terms that we use in our classes. This was just the short version of content that we can teach in an hour and a half, as opposed to this really short video. So there is a lot more detail that we could go into. So if you're not quite getting something, if it's not making any sense to you, feel free to contact us. We'll be more than happy to try to explain a little bit further. So on that note, I hope that you have a good day, and I look forward to seeing you in class.